Hi everyone, you're on Yakovlev channel, and it means that we will review some main news about war in Ukraine for the last few weeks. Currently, the Russians are preparing for winter shelling of Ukraine. Now we can see how Russia conducts preliminary reconnaissance of objects of both critical and transport infrastructure of Ukraine. The Russian special forces and services actively collect information about our critical and military infrastructure facilities in Ukraine, also using gunner collaborators. In recent weeks, Russia has been deliberately keeping its missile launchers fighter jets called MiG in the sky for 3 hours at a time to harm Ukraine's economy. Occupiers manage to do this thanks to refueling in the sky. Sometimes they are able to refuel twice during one flight. Because of this, sometimes their air alert throughout Ukraine lasts more than 3 hours in the middle of the working day. After a long pause of 52 days, the Russian terrorists resumed missile attacks, even on Kyiv. The missiles don't reach the capital because the Ukrainian air defense forces destroy them on their approach to the city. But unfortunately, in other regions, there are hits on objects of critical and residential infrastructures. The main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine confirms that the Russian Terroristic Federation currently has approximately 870 high-precision missiles in its reserves, which can hit targets at a distance of more than 350 kilometers. Of course, it's a really bad news for us. Last year, the figures were almost the same. So, this indicates that the Russian Federation managed to establish missile production and maintain it at a sufficient level to accumulate a stock of missiles. Thus, Russia voted that a third part of the budget of the Russian Federation for 2024 to 2026 will go to the war against Ukraine. In 2024, Russia is scheduled to spend more than 14 trillion rubles, that is $156 billion, on crime against Ukraine. But Ukraine will fight back. In Ukraine, serial production of the Ukrainian analog of Iranian kamikaze-drones Shahed has begun. Ukrainian defense forces are preparing a long-scale winter attack of kamikaze drones on Russia, especially in the case of shelling of Ukraine energy infrastructure by occupiers. At the same time, the record combat sortie range of the new development is 1,000 kilometers. This will cause a lot of problems for the Russian Federation in the next few months. The temporarily occupied Crimea and many regions of Russia could be under attack. With those strikes, Ukraine intends to consolidate the significant success of recent weeks, when many Russian military installations were hit on the temporarily occupied peninsula and Russian cities. The ICW resource confirms the success of the Ukrainian armed forces at the south of Ukraine in the Kherson region. Our defenders are approaching the Dnipro River coastline and are still holding their positions. Also, Ukrainian fighters expanded their control over the territory a little to the north, approximately 17 kilometers east of Kherson. But meanwhile, the Russian military personnel complain about alarm signals from the left bank. Therefore, Russian terrorists mine critical infrastructure in the occupied Kherson region. In the temporarily occupied territory of the Ukrainian Kherson region, the Russian invaders are burying explosives near stationary gas control point, electrical substations, and critical infrastructure facilities. The actions of the occupiers indicate their probable intention to destroy elements of critical infrastructure when they have to retreat. Resource of Corrective reports that the Russian Terroristic Federation still receives weapons from Europe and the USA. According to the publication, despite the sanctions, Russian trading companies have the opportunity to purchase firearms and ammunition in Europe and the United States. Weapons entered the Russian Federation through intermediaries in third countries. And of course, some of the acquired weapons are used by Russian terrorists in Ukraine, even against civilians. Also, the Financial Times confirms that more than 100 British companies have admitted to violating sanctions against Russia. The UK's approach is based on cooperation and voluntary disclosure, which allows companies to mitigate fines. According to data obtained as a result of a request to the British Ministry of Finance, more than 100 British companies have admitted to violating British sanctions against Russia. In an effort to mitigate the penalties, those corporates voluntarily reported and cooperated with investigators. Then, public resource reports that terrorist Putin earned about €1 billion from loopholes in European sanctions. Bulgaria took advantage of a special exception to supply it with Russian oil. Thus, Moscow earned about €989 million. If Brussels doesn't straighten sanctions, the situation may repeat, since the loophole for Bulgaria is valid until the end of 2024. Also, the Washington Post published interesting information. So, the Washington Post published that Russian oil, bypassing sanctions, is used even by the Pentagon. The publication writes that fuel from Russian Rosneft is purchased by a company from the Arabian Emirates and it ends up in Turkish oil storage facilities. So ownership changed several times and then Russian oil is mixed with other brands and ends up at a Greek oil refinery that serves the United States Armed Forces. Also, the Greek motor oil Hellas supplies these Russian petroleum products to government and corporate buyers in Italy, France, Spain and the United Kingdom. British intelligence revealed shockingly unpleasant information. The Kremlin falsifies history in order to introduce anti-Westernism into consciousness of Russians. The Russian leadership is increasingly using history as a weapon to strengthen anti-Western sentiment among Russians and intimidate Russia's Western neighbors. At the same time, Russia is hard increasing the volume of disinformation about Ukraine in the European mass media. Just for 9 months of 2023, more than 8,000 Russian fakes were discovered in the mass media of 6 European countries: Germany, Italy, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary and Poland. And this is twice as much as last year. For almost 2 years, the Ukrainian fact-checking project called VoxCheck has been monitoring Russian disinformation in 6 European countries, creating the Russian disinformation database called Propaganda Diary, which collects monitoring results and the most dangerous trends in pro-Russian rhetoric. In confirmation of such Russian actions, is enough to remind that the German star journalist and documentary director Hubert Ziebel, who praised Russian dictator Putin for many years, received money for it from the Russian oligarch Mordashov. Through a shell company from the offshore jurisdiction, this journalist received at least €600,000 from the Kremlin. This money was allocated to the journalist to create and promote a book about Putin. Ukrainian intelligence has some information that also came from our partner. Currently, Russia is planning a campaign called Maidan Third to destabilize Ukraine. Maidan is a coup for Russians, so this operation is understandable for us and not a surprise. You can ask why it calls Maidan. Well, this war hasn't started in 2022. It all started in 2014 with so-called Maidan, when Ukrainians relied and started to fight for our rights, including our freedom from the Russian influence. Then we actually removed from the position our pro-Russian president Yakovlev. But now Moscow seeks to sow a split in Ukrainian society and create chaos within the country in order to remove our active President Zelensky. And about good news. Ukraine has completed 90% of all reforms that the European Union expected from us, giving it candidate status. And this was confirmed by Ursula von der Leyen. In this regard, the European Commission recommends starting negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union. And actually, the European Commission has developed a special accelerated accession procedure for Ukraine. But more detailed information about it we will receive in December, so for now we just keep going to implement all needed reforms and waiting for the good news. Well, this was the last for today in main news for the recent few weeks. Stay with us for more details about war in Ukraine and see you next time on the Yakovlev Twins channel.